And lastly, I got cut off one more time. Slaves in ancient Rome were taken from places that Rome had imperialized or other city states that they had taken over, countries that they had conquered. Um, Sometimes they were members of that opposing military. Sometimes they were members of opposing societies that they thought would be handy as slaves. So, for example, sometimes physicians in ancient Rome were actually slaves, possibly trained under other empires, possibly trained as a slave to become a physician slave. Most accountants in ancient Rome were slaves. The majority of slaves, however, did domestic tasks. For a patrician or a senator or even some equites, they would have slaves in their households to do, cleaning, cooking, childcare. Unfortunately, for some of the Roman citizens, if times were tough, they might sell their children into slavery too. So sometimes slaves were from all over the Roman Empire. They were taken from other countries. They were from Rome itself, as the children of Rome sold into slavery. Occasionally, slaves could be freed. This idea of freedmen, right? This former slaves that were allowed to have their own. They were called liberati, or the freed, right? In Latin, they were allowed to have their own lives working, but oftentimes they remained slaves their whole life. And that is kind of how we will begin Caesar, right? So we've got this idea of sometimes there are emperors of Rome, sometimes there are just senators of Rome, and Caesar begins at the moment when Caesar has been emperor for a little while. Generally, people are happy with Caesar as their emperor. This idea that it's been 400 years, right, since we've had one specific person in charge of all of Rome, and Caesar is seen as this powerful, competent, very capable leader of an expanding empire. There are some people in Caesar's society, some particularly high-ranking people, who disagree with the notion of the common folk that Caesar is leading the country in the right direction. And that is kind of where we kick the play off. Is Caesar a ruler that will lead Rome in a favorable direction, or is Caesar a leader that is going to lead Rome to the path of ruin? Maybe not through his own decisions, but through the way that he acts as emperor. Is that going to undermine the fact that Rome has been a successful republic for so long? Does his very existence eliminate the need for senators? So that's going to kind of be where we start the playoff as we begin to read it. As always, if you have any questions, post them in the chat, and hopefully this allows you to fill out the rest of your notes, and then we will talk a little bit more about the very beginning of Caesar tomorrow, and we'll start to read it. I'll see you then.